who's been a good friend to Arkansas Presbytery, and we thank you for that. The pastor of Tower Hill Presbyterian Church USA in New Jersey, which is one of the fastest growing of our PCUSA churches. He has a heart and passion for the church, and for helping churches become more and more vital. And he has a wonderful program for you. Jason, thank you for being here. We appreciate you.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, which is always an adventure. So I want to make sure it all works okay. Let's see here. Everyone online, you have to give me a thumbs up when you can see my screen. All right, I got Julie's got her thumbs up, her actual physical thumb, and oh, there we go. Doyle's got the virtual thumb. All right, we're good. Well, good morning. Thanks for being here. So we're going to take some time and do a little bit of a deep dive into what I think are the 5 most important things we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about evangelism on the other side of the pandemic. Evangelism for today. How do we reach people with the gospel of Jesus Christ? Which should be the question we're all asking all the time. It should be the only question. How are we reaching people for the gospel? This talk today is a little bit more on the technical side because I have to please my fellow pastors. Got to make sure that the pastor knows what the heck he's talking about. So it's a little bit of a deeper dive into maybe what I would do for a congregation, because I really want to get to the heart of why, because the why matters more than the what. We'll talk about both, because the goal is you've got to plumb the depths of the why, and then you have to figure out for your church, your context, what's that going to mean? What are you going to do? So we're going to spend some time. I think this is a very exciting time to be in ministry. It is a very challenging time to be in ministry. As a pastor, I don't know that I've been more invigorated and excited to do the Lord's work than right now, because I think the opportunity is the biggest I'm going to see in my lifetime to reach people for Jesus. I'll talk a little more about that. This talk is called The Great Connection, 5 Key Components of Post-Pandemic Evangelism. There is a handout that exists that we have here in person. We will make sure that it gets emailed out digitally to anybody who wants it, so you get some notes on it. This is also, of course, being recorded. So you could just, if you have trouble falling asleep, just watch this over and over again. It'll be great. So I'm using the illustration of the Great Barrier Reef. And reefs around the world have seen a great deal of death, actually. What happens is they become bleached, right? And you go diving, you see the dead parts of the reef. And the reefs of the world are in trouble. There's a illustration that was used in the book Missional by Alan Roxburgh, where he was talking about the story of a friend of his who's a marine biologist. She said they're dying, all of them, and there is nothing anyone can do about it. I can continue to swim among them as if nothing has changed, but in a generation, they'll all be dead. And he likened that to the church in America. The reefs are dying because the sea has changed. Think about how different the world around you is now than it was 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago. Think about how different the world is now from 2019. The sea has changed. Churches have been struggling for decades to figure out what to do about it. Some decided, no, we're going to wait this out. People are going to they're going to come back. Those kids that we raised in church, they're going to come back. When they grow up and have kids, they'll be back. Well, that was true anecdotally a little bit. It's not been true generationally. Many left the church and they just left. They did not come back. It used to be that the culture that we live in was very, at least warm to Christianity. You couldn't say that we live in a Christian culture today, not in the United States of America. It's post-Christian, meaning Christians no longer get the front row. We no longer have preference in society. In fact, it's quite the opposite. A lot of things have changed. And the reason why I want to bring that up is because I don't want churches to feel like, oh my gosh, what did we do? It's not so much what you did do. It's how we didn't figure out what was going on around us. It's happening across all churches. Any church, if you're a church that has existed for longer than 10 years, you deal with this issue. The culture around us is different than the culture that we planted in. The longer time you have, the harder it is to overcome. I always want to talk a little bit about the unfortunate news before we talk about the solutions. This is the latest research from Barna about the generational disconnect that we are having. Is this working?
I think we're.
Oh, it was a low battery. Here we go. Everyone online still good? Julie, give me thumbs up. Okay, good. We had our device that is our camera. It turns out was not plugged in and the battery just died. So they are plugging it back in.
It is plugged in.
It is plugged in. Well, it's back on.
For a second.
It's showing low battery.
Oh, I see.
It's on low battery.
It's on.
This is just loose.
It is temperamental. This is a really cool device.
I'll just sit here and hold this.
Oh, I see.
It's just strange.
It's on.
Uh-oh.
If we were in church, I'd ask you to turn to your neighbor.
The battery.
We back? All right. Nobody breathe. If those of you online, you would get a kick out of this. It's actually being propped up with a pen cap.
And I'll just sit here and
You're
hold
just gonna
it.
hold it?
I guess.
Do they really need to see me? Okay, well, they're looking at the screen anyways. They're looking at the screen. It's okay. You don't need the camera. You don't need it. I don't want you sitting on your knees.
It's fine. It's fine.
Okay. All right, well, if you need a break, someone will have to
We'll
spell
take
you. Just
turns.
tag out.
Do you
Okay.
want to sit down?
Okay.
I'm gonna move.
We'll keep going. So talking about the generational disconnect, 43% of millennials, and some of this today is going to be a review for our Rogers folks. We talked about a few of the things I'm going to talk about today on Saturday, but I think it's good for reinforcement to hear this as many times as possible. 43% of millennials do not believe or care if God exists. 43% of an entire generation. Now, they didn't interview a whole generation, but you know how these things work. They get a pretty good sample size. 43%. Gen Z, which is the under 21s right now, Gen Z are twice as likely as adults to say they are atheists. Now, a little silver lining is the new report that just came out by Barna about global teens indicates that they are the most open generation to Jesus. Even though they would say they're atheists, they're open to learning about Jesus, which is fascinating to me. 2/3 of young people raised Christian will walk away as young adults. I say those words, you feel them in your heart. You know it's true. You've seen it happen. 65% of Gen Z agree that many religions can lead to eternal life. Honestly, well, I don't know if I want to go here. I think because we're not clear about who Jesus is and what he offers sometimes, we assume they know the very basics of the gospel. But if I were to ask a teenager, what's the gospel? Shoot, if I were to ask an adult, what's the gospel? Would they be able to say it? Would they be able to respond, right? So here's my point in all of this. What good are our traditions if there's no one to hand them to? Reminds me of Judges, that time in Judges. where it said a whole generation grew up that neither knew the Lord or what he'd done for Israel. We need to do everything in our power to reach the next generation for Jesus. I don't see how anyone, no one can convince me otherwise, that it is our most important task. And then we had the pandemic, which of course made everything worse. The pandemic was like jet fuel for everything that was going on in culture. In fact, Tom Rayner in Lifeway did some research, and they were looking at attendance patterns. As we know, people have been coming to church less often, and even your most committed Christians are coming less often. There are a lot of reasons for that, but the numbers that they had projected for attendance decline, they say the numbers we're seeing now are numbers they weren't expecting until 2025. So in other words, the pandemic just jet fueled the whole thing, just made it go faster. And of course, the pandemic has definitely been jet fuel for the phenomenon of self-guided spirituality. I think with a lot of online resources we have, people feel that it's just a journey, a journey of the self. It's a journey of the self, and you don't really need a community to do that. It's a journey of self-discovery. Of course, mobility and options on Sunday morning, institutional baggage that people have. And listen, church, we are certainly have some blame in there. I mean, I don't want to hear about another pastor scandal or church scandal or Boy Scout scandal. I mean, it's awful. It's horrendous. And we've done it to ourselves. So people question the institution of the church, and I don't blame them. But instead of getting upset about that, I think it would be important to just say, hey, how do we consider that when we're trying to talk to people? Of course, the isolation and disconnect that happened in COVID was absolutely brutal. And there's some people that you know who are active members in the church who just disappeared, fell off the face of the earth. They just never came back. It happened to us too. And I'd say we're a vital church. We're vibrant. We got a lot of growth. But we lost a whole segment of people that never came back. A bunch of new people took their place, which is interesting. A lot of those people, they just never came back. And then we just had, it's funny, so 2 weeks ago, a couple and their kids showed up after 7 years of being away. And we never knew what happened to them. We didn't get good follow-up on them. But apparently their kids, something happened in Sunday school. I don't know if it was a teacher yelled at them or something. They never came back. I've seen them around the community for years. Hey, how's it going? Whatever. And they finally came back. And it's like, we don't know why people are making the decisions that they're making. We just know that it's different. And yet, I believe we are experiencing the biggest evangelism opportunity of our lifetime. I think the church is perfectly teed up to give people exactly what they're hungry for. They're hungry for a relationship with God, and they're hungry for a connection with one another. I've never seen people hungrier. Now, I'm not that old, not that young, but I have not seen, since I've been aware as a Christian, an opportunity like this to connect people with church. I call it the Great Connection. You can trademark that, baby. Just remember, if you hear that anywhere else, I said it first. And I said it on the podcast like a year ago. So listen. No, people are starving for connection with God and with one another. All the stress and anxiety and depression during the pandemic increased. We know this. All the data shows how hard it was on all of us to not be together. Substance abuse increased. People are looking for belonging and meaning because we're wired that way. Whether we realize it or not, we are communally connected. If you believe in a triune God and you believe that we are invited into community with him, if we bear his image, we are communal beings. We can't survive apart from one another. We certainly can't thrive. And we saw this in a lot of ministry things we did. We felt the hunger for people, so we just started trying stuff. We did a newcomers event. We rented the upstairs of an Irish pub in our town and said, anybody who joined the church in the last 2 years or anybody, come. come get to know people. And it was pretty last minute. I think we advertised it maybe 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time, and we got 75 people to show up. The only thing I can explain is like they were hungry to get together. We had a hymn sing. A lot of our folks, particularly in our traditional service, were the ones who felt most isolated during the pandemic, and like, hey, we need to get them together. Let's do a hymn sing, and let's do a potluck. They came out of the woodwork. I think we had like another 75 or 100 people show up. My wife at Easter time last year, about a week before Easter, said, I feel like we should do something for families, like an Easter egg hunt. She threw it together in about 24 hours and we had 150 people show up. It wasn't because we were doing anything great. We were just perceiving the need and trying stuff. But I think the reason why they worked is because people are absolutely hungry for this right now. Of course, we had a baby boom during the pandemic. And man, if all those kids come on one Sunday, we're in trouble. But how exciting though, because this is the generation that's going to grow up in the church. If you get the families to get engaged now, then their kids are going to rise up through the ranks. So churches out there who are small and don't have much of a youth ministry, you're playing the long game here, but this is an actual baby boom that they're going to be writing about in our history books. And I think it's time to take a swing. I don't believe stewardship is saving for a rainy day. I'm going to say that again. I don't believe stewardship is saving for a rainy day. There are parables that Jesus teaches about that. It's about investing in the kingdom of God. Let me tell you what I mean. We have an endowment at our church. It's big enough to do things with, but it's not humongous. And we need to do some renovation in our church to accommodate the growth of the kids program. And there are some who'd say, you can't spend the endowment. And I say, you make hay when the sun's shining. What do you think nobody's going to give to an endowment fund that never gets used. Nobody wants that. They want to give to something that the church is going to use. Doesn't mean be frivolous with it and just blow the whole thing. But at the same time, it's being a good steward doesn't mean, by the way, saving for a rainy day, it's raining. That's right. Are you just going to wait until like you're done and you got nothing left? Oh, now we have some money in reserves. Why don't you leverage that money to invest in your ministries now? It's time to take a swing. Okay. Evangelism. I want to make sure we get working off the same definition here. What do I mean? It's kind of a dirty word in Presbyterian circles, actually. It's a word that has a lot of baggage. And people don't even like saying that word anymore because there's all this baggage with it. I want to take it back. I want to claim it back. I believe it's simply proclaiming the message of Jesus Christ. The kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe the good news. It's delivering the gospel. That's how I'm defining evangelism. You all may define it a little different. That's how I'm defining it for the purpose of this talk today. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Let me tell you about my first experience of evangelism. I was in 8th grade, and my friend David Pardo. Oh shoot, I shouldn't say the last name. Oh well, David. Sorry, this didn't work. I wasn't raised in church or anything, so I had no idea about Jesus or anything like this. And I remember one day he hands me a gospel tract. You know a gospel tract? I know you're Presbyterian, but you know a gospel. You can, okay. So I got this gospel tract that told me about the evil of rock and roll music. So I started reading it, and I get to the end. It's basically like Satan has control of your soul. You need to, and it freaked me out. I was so freaked out. Let me tell you something. It did not make me want to go to church. That was my only evangelism attempt that was made at me, and it turned me off for a long, long time. I don't think that is the best way. I don't think that is how you reach people with the gospel of Jesus. I don't know. I could be wrong. Someone's probably got a story about how it scared him into faith, but I've never been big on scare tactics to Jesus. I think I prefer love tactics. Anyway, my last experience of evangelism happened here. And I told some of you from Rogers, you know the story I'm going to tell. So I went to a downtown First Friday event in Bentonville. There was really no church presence down there, but there was a couple that was handing out, guess what? Tracts. And this is what they handed me. Why live like you won't die? The statistics say that 10 out of 10 people die. It's true. We all have an appointment with death. A question each of us ask is, what happens after I die? The Bible says, it goes on, and basically tells me that I will not make it unless I put my faith in Jesus. Now, technically, is that true? That's one thing. Is that the truth in love? It is not. I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is still happening? Let me tell you about the most important piece of evangelism that happened to me. Her name is Agnes Sales. My mother ran a preschool in a Methodist church. We were not Christians. We didn't go to church. We had to join. That was we had to play the politics. We had to join. In order to join, I had to get baptized. It meant nothing to me. It meant something to God, though. Because about 7 years later came the confirmation where I put my faith in Jesus. And the Lord had his hand on me from that baptism, I'm convinced, even though it meant nothing to me. Anyway, Agnes Sales, she ran the youth program at Glendale United Methodist Church. We were doing, she and my mother were doing VBS. And I wanted nothing to do with VBS. And she said, hey, Jason, you know what? I need some help. I can't do this all myself. I need someone to help me make the snacks and bring them to the, and I don't know, how could I say no to her? She's like, I need someone to help me. I can't do it myself. I need to help me. And so I helped her. So for a week, Agnes and I spent time preparing food, giving it to the kids, cleaning up. She never once talked to me about Jesus, but I felt like the way she treated me and the way she loved me in that week, she talked about Jesus. That was the most impactful thing. It warmed me to the idea of church. And that later, that seed would grow in me and got me to a place, eventually, of faith. Agnes Sales, who passed away years ago, and I had found this picture of her from her obituary. What a wonderful woman of God. Why do I point out Agnes? Because our churches all have Agneses who are making a difference that we don't even realize. You don't have to be flashy to make a difference. You don't have to have a fog machine and lasers, or, you know. You don't need all that to make a difference. But you have to get out there with the love of Jesus Christ. Be willing to invite people in. What people need isn't information about Jesus, church, or faith. They need interpretation. We are in the information age. They can find whatever information they want. They need interpretation. I use this equation: consistency over time equals trust. Evangelism at its heart is an invitation to relationship. That's what I believe. There's one of my son's 8th grade football coaches. I had this feeling just from a genuine place. I just wanted to befriend this guy who is definitely not a church person, definitely crass and tough Italian guy. And I just wanted to befriend him. I didn't have an agenda for him about, well, get him to Jesus, right? I just want to be a good friend. I decided. I don't know. I felt the Lord telling me that's what you need to do. And about a year ago, we were at practice, and I was just waiting to pick up my son. He came up to me and he goes, my wife and I aren't very religious. Okay, where's this going? And he said, but my daughter found your church online and watched the worship service. His daughter's the same age as my son. Watched the worship, and I think that's kind of cool. Fast forward to this year. It was a rainy day and they had nowhere to practice. And I said, why don't you come to the church? You could do a walkthrough in our fellowship hall and we could watch film. Really? You let us do that? Yeah, let's do it. We did. We had the boys. They did a walkthrough. It's funny, when the coaches were all walking into church, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to act. They walk in, they're taking their hats off. They're like, I'm like, we're Presbyterian, man, it's okay, like. But. And then I'll share this. They're having some issues that they're going through. And they reached out to my wife. About getting their kids connected with church. I still don't know where it's all gonna land. But I feel like that's the posture of evangelism. It's genuine friendship and relationship. It's not like, I want to get you to these steps of faith and I'm gonna, by golly, I'm gonna get you to, like, I don't think it's that. I think it's, how do we be friends genuinely with people? And then they'll let you know, they know you're a person of faith. They'll know who to come ask when they're up against it in their life. I think that's evangelism. It's living a life of invitation. All right, now here are the 5 things I think are crucial to developing this as a church. The first is, I think every church needs to develop a theological vision. I'll unpack what that means. A theological vision, which answers the question, how do we bring the gospel to bear in this particular cultural context? What does this have to do with anything? Well, it's like your church saying, hey, there's this community, actually there's this family that we want to invite to church. You know what we should do? We should make them a bunch of cheeseburgers and bring them to their house. Oh yeah, great. We're great at making cheeseburgers. Let's do that. Okay, cool. Make one cheeseburger, knock, knock, right? Give them to the cheeseburgers. And they say, oh, thank you so much. That's so kind of you. And you see like there's a little bit of a, oh, what? I'm sorry, what's wrong? Oh, I mean, we're vegan. I'm so sorry. We're not gonna. If you don't develop a theological vision, which I'll explain in a moment, it's like you're giving cheeseburgers to vegans. You may run the risk of not connecting at all because you're not thinking it through. You're not understanding who you're trying to reach, who you are, and how do you bridge that gap for them, not for what you think they need. What do they actually need? There's a great book that I want to recommend. This is Timothy Keller's Center Church, which is this great opus book. It's a deep theological book. I took a year using this book with a vision team in my church, and we went through the whole thing to help think through what's our theological vision. It was the first thing I did when I started as pastor. We did it for a year before we made any big changes, is we discerned. It's a great book for doing that. It's deep water. It's slow going, but it's a great resource in my opinion. And he talks in his book about theological vision. He said, it's a faithful restatement of the gospel with rich implications for life, ministry, and mission in a type of culture at a moment in history. So in other words, it's how to see the landscape of what you're supposed to do as a church, developing a theological vision. He says he discovered that someone told him that, there's hardware. Like think about computers. There's hardware, like the computer itself. There's software that helps you run stuff. And he discovered that somebody explained to him there's something called middleware. In other words, there's a layer of programming that does the interpretation between the hardware and the software that you're using. He said a theological vision is like the middleware. It's interpreting what you're using, who you are, and what software you're trying to execute, what you're trying to do. So when you develop this vision, and it could be a theological vision statement, which I'll show you an example in a minute. But it's trying to understand, you can do this as a whole church. It's like, this is our big theological vision, or you can do it for one area. This is how we think we want to reach young families. This is how we think we want to do it. You can do it for that too. It's up to you. A lot of different ways that you can implement this. So he uses, at least in denominational terms, says your hardware is your doctrinal foundation, right? Reformed theology, right? That's our foundation. What are we trying to do? Our software is our ministry programs. So what's the vision for how to bring the gospel through those ministry programs in a particular time and place? Again, so we're not giving cheeseburgers to vegans. I boil it down in my process, and we talked about this, First Pres Rogers, is whenever I do a consultation, I break it down I try to make it easier and to think about in 3 steps: discover, discern, decide. How do you as a church discover who you are? What's your hardware you're working with really? Discern who you're trying to reach. What are some ideas of how to do that through who you are? And then decide, what's your plan going to be? It could be a church-wide vision or a particular ministry vision. And of course, I would suggest you do both eventually. Let's take it step by step, and then I'll pause and see if there's any questions. So when you discover, you're answering the question, who are we trying to reach? Right? Why are we not currently reaching them? When you discern, you're asking, how can we bring the gospel to bear on this particular culture, time, and place? And then decide which strategy will we choose to implement for now. So let's take our example. Everybody wants young families, right? So, okay, we discover we want to get more young families in the life of our church. There's not a church I've met who thought, no, we're good on young families. Yeah, they could go somewhere else. Everybody wants young families, so they're definitely the target. Which, just be careful we don't make young families an idol. We got to focus on people, and we're not focusing on them for us. We're focusing on them for them, right? It's not because we need more resources, It's not that. We actually love them and want them to be part of our community and learn about a life of faith. All right, so we're trying to discover, and that's okay. Well, why aren't we reaching them? And I just talked about this on Saturday. I call that facing the scale. All right, how bad is it? I ate those cookies at Christmas. I don't want to step on that scale. Maybe I just won't. A lot of churches, they don't like stepping on the scale, right? They don't want to see how bad it is. How long have we neglected our health as a church? But until you do that, you can never truly address what's going on. You have to look at it in all of its ugliness. And it's not all ugly. There are things that every church does very well. But you got to see, why haven't we been connecting? And you got to be honest with yourselves, right? Why aren't we connecting? Again, this is a resource that I love because I think it really points this out when it comes to young families. Dreams of the Overworked was a book that was written by 2 professors. And they studied 9 families over a period of 3 years to figure out what were the big stressors on the lives of young families, on the parents. And they discovered that young parents today are living with 3 myths. The myth that they must be the ideal worker. Boss says jump, they say how high. They come in late, they go in early, they work on weekends, whatever it takes to be the ideal worker. Second, they have to be the perfect parent. Got to show up to all the stuff. You got to be at all the dance recitals. You got to be at all the games. Got to go to back to school night. The problem is those 2 myths already cannot coexist. Because you cannot be at all the stuff if you're the ideal worker, right? And then third, they have to have the ultimate body. Not just, cardiovascular health. They need to look fit. They need to be fit. They need to be a specimen. And they believe that where the stress comes in is they've been led to believe that they can have all 3. And it's stressing them out. It's creating a lot of anxiety in their lives. And the book talks about scaffolding. It says people who we need to support our young families by providing scaffolding, people who help you live, work, and parent in the digital age. And what a perfect opportunity for the church to jump in and to be a part of that. So, for example, how could the church help you? Well, listen, we can, let's provide an after-school program. Hey, we're not too far from the school. It seems like, you're worried about, you got to stay at work late, or you're worried about your kids' studies and everything. Let us help you do that. Let us help you do that. Oh, you can't come to a small group. You can't come to a Bible study, and you'd like to because you got the kids, you're not sure what to do, you can't afford babysitting. We've taken care of all that for you. Or maybe we have a list of babysitters that the church pays. Give any one of them a call. Or bring it to church. We're gonna have a bunch of kids here. We bought pizza. I mean, that's always the answer. Just get pizza. How do we provide scaffolding? For us, as we were asking this question recently with our young families, about last spring, we were asking these questions because we want to make sure in the fall that we were ready to go and dialed in. One of the things that we thought of is we wanted to create more on-demand resources for parents that they could access online. Whether it's a teaching or maybe it's one of our parenting small groups and we just record it and post it somewhere so that they can watch it on their time. We thought more on-demand resources would be good for these busy families. Also, we wanted to leverage travel sports. If you have more on-demand things, they can still feel connected with the church when they're traveling around the country for some sports, right? So they still feel connected with you. We thought about having parent events at the same time as our youth groups and figuring out a way to do that, which our crew has been working on. And you really need, what you need in churches, you need somebody that's called a person of peace. So you need young families to beget young families. It's a chicken and an egg thing. You need some young family folks that you know to invite a couple friends and show up to something. You need to develop and figure out who those are. And they may not even attend your church. It could be relatives in your congregation, young families. And say, hey, could you help us out? We're trying to get something started and we love your feedback on how to do it. Could you help us just in this 3-week window do this? And see if some other folks would be interested in this. Find out what they're interested in. Hey, what would get you to come to church for something? Is there something that you feel like you're missing or you need, right? Just you start asking questions about what you think they, not what you don't start off with. I think young families need this, so we're going to do it. It's cheeseburgers, right? So I'm make sure you're asking that question. And then you're deciding, right? And for us, it meant we're going to pick one on-demand parenting resource for this fall and offer it to them. And what we did was we simply called North Point Community Church, which is Andy Stanley's church in Alpharetta, Georgia. We called North, there's actually, we have got a couple of connections there. And one of them is an ex-Presbyterian pastor who's been on staff there for about 15 years. And I said, hey, you guys have this great parenting summit that you do every year online. Could we let our people sign up for that? Oh, let me check. Not because they need to approve that, but they didn't want it to mess up their metrics because they're trying to reach people too. And they didn't want people from New Jersey populating it and then getting confused as to who's actually. So, but they wrote back, they're like, invite anybody you want. It's a resource for everyone. So we didn't even create it. We sent out an email blast to all of our parents and said, hey, we got this great online resource about parenting in light of the pandemic that we think is so great. It's got these experts and it's available on demand until the end of the month. So give it a watch, right? So we didn't even create the thing. We just pointed them to the thing, which is just as valuable to them. So don't feel like you have to create everything that you're doing. Sometimes just curating and letting them know about it is enough. All right, let's pause here and see if there are some questions so far. I'm going to do this a couple of points in because I'm going to go through a lot of material. And they could be online questions too. I'll just need someone's help. Maybe Jane, if you quite delicately see if there are any questions in the chat because the way my screen is.
This may be far afield, but you use Amplify, is that right? The Methodist online?
No.
You don't?
Mm-mm.
I'm misunderstood them. But that sounds like an on-demand type of thing.
Mm.
Never mind, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all right. The other thing that we did was we purchased a Right Now media subscription and made it available to anybody who wants it.
Yeah,
So
that must be
we
what I
put it
was
on the website for anybody to sign up and use it, and it's been phenomenal. People are using it. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got Right Now Media and we've passed that on kind of individually to different people. And I've done that outside of congregation, so.
That's great. Yeah, that's good. That's a great resource, like Christian Netflix.
Yeah, it is, it is.
Any other question? We're on the same page so far? Okay. Let me give you an example of how this all worked out in my church. So, that's our beautiful sign. Mine came in 2012. And there's a lot of info on there. I don't know how you're supposed to see it driving by. But wait, what's the number, honey? Yeah. But we definitely we wanted to reach young families. We were a very traditional church that a lot of young families had started leaving for more contemporary pastors. And one of the reasons I was hired was to try to do something about that. I was to help them start a contemporary service. And that was, a big part of the theological vision was we think we're going to be reaching young families in a big way through the Sunday morning experience. So for us, it was, we need to develop this new service. And we also needed to rethink our Sunday school model. It was very traditional, very like lecture-based Sunday school. And I don't know if you've been to a kid's classroom nowadays, your kids or grandkids, they don't learn like we did. They learn totally different. They got smart boards, they work in cohorts, they're moving around all day. They have bright colors, lots of stimulation. I mean, they're on Chromebooks. My kids don't have textbooks anymore. It's like, it's all different. And our Sunday school models in some churches are still acting like it's when we grew up. And there's a reason it's not connecting, right? So we figured those were the things that we needed to do. And so you're going to laugh at this theological vision statement. It's way too intense. We ended up boiling it down. But what we came up with was, having thankful hearts, we seek to partner in God's worldwide restoration project, a movement of the gospel of Jesus Christ that brings personal conversion, growth, community formation, and cultural renewal in service to the greater Red Bank community and through it, the world. We took a year to put that statement together because we thought it was going to help guide us, and it did for sure. But we also knew that is not exactly memorable and portable. So we boiled it down to say, our mission vision is to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ by becoming a church for all generations. Not older generations, not just younger, for all generations. And so everything that we do as a church, every program we decide to do, we run through that lens. Are we fulfilling our mission vision? Is this something for all generations? Is this leading people to a growing relationship with Jesus? So, well, it took a long time to get here, but that when you go through that filter, you start asking things like, why are we doing this potluck? Well, because we do it every year. Yeah, but why? Because we do it every year. I told you, right? But what's the purpose of it? And is it in service to the mission vision of the church? So this is where this gets really important, is when you start asking this question, it's going to make what you're already doing more effective because you're going to tweak things. Hey, you know what? That potluck really doesn't serve, but how could it? So we don't have to get rid of the potluck, but maybe if we added this part, it would serve the mission vision better. Or it will stop you from taking on things that compete with resources and time. So I remember a couple of years ago, we had someone from the Red Cross came and wanted to do a blood drive in our church, and they were talking about what we needed to do. And it was during a very busy season for us. And our leadership team sat down and we started talking about it, and we're like, we're going to have to say no, because we can't do this right now. We've got these other things that are, according to our mission and vision, that we don't want to compete resources. We want to add an extra announcement where we got, we want to promote what's the big thing we want people to do. What's the action that we want them to take? We don't want to give them 15 different things. They won't remember them anyway. We don't want to clutter what we're doing with an extra announcement. How about this? Go back to the Red Cross and tell them, we're very sorry, but we believe in the Red Cross. Red Cross will send an email pointing people to where you have it. And please call us again in the spring and we can talk about hosting it. But sometimes, according to your mission and vision, you'll have to say no to things. But that's how you know what to say no and yes to, is you ask the question, is this in line with our theological vision? And so, I mean, that's what we did. Our solution, our cheap solution was buy a banner and put it around it. And it's been on there ever since. All right, second, bless you. I think the second key is your church has to have an outward facing posture. An outward facing posture. In other words, your church exists primarily for the sake of the people not in it. It's also for the people in it. But the goal, at least according to the Great Commission, the last time I checked, was facing outward to the people that you're trying to reach. What happens in our churches, and you all know this, I'm not going to tell you this, but we all get focused inward because we're concerned with everything going inside the church. It's almost inevitable. But you got to break yourself of the habit of looking inward first. And that happens with just being intentional. Hey, we're going to have that potluck. Yeah, but who's it for? Well, it's for everybody. That's always the answer, right? For everybody. Is it though? You think those families down the street are really want to come to the church potluck? Maybe. I know your food's good. But that's just not their love language. If you said, we're going to have a food truck, they'll come swarming. Right? It's just all about how do you make it easier for those who are searching for God? An outward facing posture has everything to do with reaching people where they are, not where church people think they should be. And I'll just, if anybody wants a little proof texting on that, just read Luke 15. The lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son reveals what God cares about most. That chapter reveals God's heart. His heart is to seek and find and rescue the lost. That is God's heart, according to Jesus. So I don't know, we might want to listen to that. I sound really snarky today. I'm not trying to. I don't know. I feel like, yeah, see, but snark's your love language, partner. All right.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Reverend Dr. Tucker, as a person that was not raised up in the church and a Yankee too, I can totally relate to what you're bringing here, because in a way, that background helps us to look at other people who have that background, because people who are already in the church don't need to know the message.
Or do they?
Well,
We need to be reminded of it.
or taken to a different level of immersion. If you will.
Yeah. I love this passage from Acts 15. It is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. You remember this moment, what this was about? It was about, no, they got to be Jewish first. They got to follow all the Jewish commands, not just the 10 commandments, like the almost 600 commands that all the rabbinic interpretations of that. Now they got to do that. And they said, no, it's really 2, right? And we shouldn't make it difficult for those Gentiles turning to God. And I think we accidentally make it difficult for people searching for God because, I mean, they come in and it's like, if they're not used to church, it's literally like going to a foreign country. There's all sort of insider language. There's technical terms that they don't understand. There are terms that just sound weird, that aren't weird to us. I remember when I first started, I was a youth pastor in a church, and I hadn't really been in the life of the church much. And for about 3 years, every time they made an announcement about the narthex, I didn't know what they were talking about. And I was afraid to ask what they were talking about. Oh yeah, there's signups in the narthex. And I remember asking when I first got married, I go to my wife and I go, what's a narthex? She's like, it's like the foyer. And I'm like, oh, why didn't they just say foyer? So, I mean, there's stuff like that we do all the time. And the gathering space, there you go. So we've outlawed the word narthex in the church. Anyway, this is interesting to me. and an important reminder. So talking about outward facing postures, the most outward facing is everything that we're doing online. Did you know 2 in 5 non-Christians, 41%, say they would be open to participating in a spiritual conversation about Christianity if the experience felt friendly? Isn't that interesting? That's especially true online. A lot of people are watching online, even if they're exploring their faith. Listen, 100% of the people you're trying to reach are online. 100% of them. They're all online. And online's not going anywhere. There was a revolution of online presence of churches during the pandemic, which I think is fantastic. But it's also a liability. It is the biggest front door in church history. But it is now your front door. Before they ever drive to your church, they're checking you out online. Every single person. It's rare that you get somebody drives by your church and like, ooh, that's a pretty church. I think I'd like to go there. It doesn't happen that much anymore. It still happens. But the people you're trying to reach are online. So this has implications for your website, your worship online, and social media. And I just want to encourage you. There's a Presbytery resource. What's his name? Is it John Fong? Are you familiar with him? It's a PCUSA guy that does this and talks about this in churches. I think it's John Fong, to look that up. I think they hired him at some point to teach this stuff. But anyway, he helps, I think, a lot of churches just starting to figure it out. You know, what should we do? So you have to ask, is your web platform appealing? How are people accessing your worship service? Is it easy to use? Does anyone notice me if I show up online? If I like it, what do I do next? And then I call it the social media 80-20 rule. I'm a firm believer, and I think our church is still working on this. We're not there yet. Is, especially for younger generations, they are really discerning, oddly enough, about what they see on social media. Even though, like my kids, the research shows you only have 8 seconds to reach my kids through social media. 8 seconds is all you get. And if they don't believe that you are trustworthy and authentic and interesting, they're out. And you have to be able to do it with the sound off because they're scrolling on mute. So one of the ways that churches can do this is talk about the community 80% of the time and talk about yourself 20% of the time. So in other words, congratulations, Rogers High School, getting second place. And you know, you guys were amazing. You had such a great year. Your friends at First Pres Rogers. Right? Oh, hey, we saw that there is a need. So-and-so church is doing a food drive. Want to make sure everybody saw this. It's a great thing that they're doing. So it's not about you. It's about how are you lifting up and helping your community. The rule is 80% of those should be about other people. And 20% about yourself. Because if all you're posting is like some sort of quote from Jesus, and then here are our worship times, and here's our potluck, and here's our, it's not interesting to anybody. They just keep scrolling. That's not how you're getting people. And I think it's sort of a nice reminder that it's about the outward posture. Okay.
Do you have,
No, please.
sorry,
No,
do
you
you have to clear that usage of, what came to mind was I saw a sign as we drove past the high school of them having a flower sale, a mum sale or something. Do you have to contact the school to get permission to use that?
No, they would love it.
information on your website?
No, you can,
Like it, or-
yeah, you can just like it or repost it.
Okay.
You could repost it and so hit share. If you're doing it on Facebook, hit share, and you could write a sentence or two on top of the share. So you could say, hey, we saw this and we just think everyone in the community ought to know. And it'll say it was from First Pres Rogers, right? No, they're kidding. They would love it for anything to get promoted. That's almost true of almost everybody. If they posted something they want people to show up at, that's exactly what they want, people to repost and share.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's talk about websites. These are little captions for some of the worst websites I've ever seen. And I will not out who these came from. Listen, if you're using clip art on your website, you have a problem. I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend anybody. But if you're using clip art, if anything looks like Precious Moments, you're you know, you're watching a thing, because remember, this is outward facing. Your website is for the people you're trying to reach. It's not for the people inside your church. This is a big misconception. You don't need your website to remind people or to have like all of the granular details of your church calendar. You do not. Or yeah, we have session minutes. I promise you don't need any of that. That's not what it's for. Remember, the people that are looking at your website are the people checking out your church. So make sure everything that the language makes sense. Like, again, they said adult education class. Oh, great. That sounds inspiring. Or maybe we're excited to talk about the biggest questions of the Christian faith in the next 6 weeks. Got questions? Come show up. Right? It's and how you word it, making sure that you got appealing visuals. It's simple, it's easy to use, and it doesn't bait and switch. So if your website has a bunch of like young people drinking coffee and everything like that, and then they show up and they're not a young person under 55, that's worse than having Precious Moments, right? Because then they feel that they've been deceived and they will never come back.
They'll announce it too.
Oh, yes, they will. Oh, you heard about that? Don't go there. I made that mistake. Yeah. Don't bait and switch them. Again, my Rogers friends, you heard me say this on Saturday, but people are making decisions even when they come in person based on, is your church outward facing or not? Secrets of a Secret Shopper. I know Carol's a fan of that. We've talked about that. Some churches have looked at that book, but the data says that first-time guests decide if they're coming back within the first 10 minutes on campus. That means from the parking lot, 10 minutes in, they're not even, the service probably hasn't even started yet, and they've already decided if they're coming back. Well, why is that? Well, think about everything that happens. Do I know where to go? Is there a place? Is there something for my kids? They have kids. Where do I do that? I wonder if it's going to be fun for my kids. I wonder if they're expecting visitors. I wonder if I have to sign up to have my kids go to Sunday school. I wonder, am I allowed to bring, honey, are we allowed to bring our coffee in? I don't know. You know, and they walk up to a building and maybe it's not clear. Maybe they don't know. Within 10 minutes, they're just like, oh man, I don't know, but maybe we made a mistake. And you can overcome a lot of that with really good people who are greeting people when they're coming in. And clarity, right?
By
Make
the way, I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead,
at
please.
the Presbytery meeting, which you're all going to attend, I'm sure, the Future of the Church Committee has 10 of those books, first come, first serve, along with 10 of the Art of Gathering. So if you're at Presbytery meeting, swing by and pick one up.
All right, very good. But even like so, we had these signs outside of our church. And we had like 2 of prime real estate rows that said for senior parking only. What we realized was the message that was sending was, we're an old church. So we figured out that we were able to, and actually people that were parking in them weren't all seniors, I'm just saying. Because we didn't need that many spaces. So we cut it down and we had them put up signs that said guest parking to make sure that they get the prime parking, as well as folks who need it for special needs. So it's like, it's amazing the messages that are sent just by your facilities. And so I think making sure that you're as outward facing as possible is really important. So that means, is your parking well-defined, traffic flow? How about the guest experience or the visitor experience? What's that like for them? Is it a soft landing? Or is everything clear? And what about your church environments? Does it look like you're ready for anybody to come in? Or does it look like the church has a whole bunch of storage units in the hallways? I mean, I've been to some churches and it's like the funniest part, one of my buddies who's actually his church is really thriving now, which is great. When he called me in to look at the church though, he took me on a tour and we were halfway through, we started cracking up like to tears because he realized about every 2 minutes, he was like, oh, and this is used for storage. He must have said it a dozen times. And, no, this for, we just use it. It doesn't get used anymore. It's for storage. And at one point we just started laughing so hard and it just became a joke. So I talk to him all the time and be like, so how's the storage situation going? You just got to make sure that your environments at church are outward facing. They're appealing, they're clean, they're welcoming, they're inviting as possible. I love using this because it just shows like these are things I think about and we go through all the time. Again, when we did our contemporary worship service, I joked on Saturday about we had the jungle of fake plants in our fellowship hall because we're trying to make it look less like a fellowship hall. I don't know where the heck we got all these plants, but that's when we first started. And you start with whatever you have to start with. But all we did was we bought just a couple of pieces of fabric, the 2 LED lights. We thinned out the herd on the plants, and it created more of an appealing worship space. And the service began to grow. And of course, we ended up completely transforming our sanctuary to accommodate contemporary worship. So now, if you ever come to my church, you come to the 9 o'clock, you don't see any screens, there's no lights, there's no anything. It looks like the traditional service. You wouldn't know a contemporary service is in there. And then in about 15 minutes, we change everything over and it looks like that. So we have screens and lights and we have a fake wall that we put up that blocks the chancel where the choir is. And that wall is made of like spandex material. There's companies that make these portable walls that look real. So we have a crew that comes in, they set up the wall. And again, there's about a half hour between services and we set everything up then. But the reason we do it is because the environment matters. We want to make sure that it felt contemporary for our contemporary worshipers who are moving from fellowship hall, which is a very casual space, to a very formal sanctuary. We knew it was only going to work if we're thinking about how do we make this environment work for them. And I'll say your outward posture is as much about how you communicate things on Sunday morning. Get rid of those super churchy words that are a little bit hard to understand. I actually address people in the room on Sundays. So I'll say, hey, there's a part of the service we do a prayer time, and I'll say, listen, if it's your first time here, or you haven't been to church in a long time, or someone dragged you here, I'm so glad that you're here. And listen, this isn't a place where you have everything figured out. You may have some big questions about God. You may be not even close to faith. I just want to say you're in the right place. And I hope you get a chance to ask your questions. And then we go on with the service. But you don't expect that everybody in the room knows everything. That's how you have an outward facing posture, even in your worship service. You want to create moments that lead to movement. How do we create a moment for people? You could do that in any style of worship. How do we create a moment for people to respond to Jesus? Music's a great way of achieving that, right? How do you create a moment? The preaching has to be outward facing. You can't assume everyone in the room knows the gospel. You've got to weave the gospel into everything that you do. And then, of course, the music has to be as good as you can possibly get it, because that's such a huge part of service. In our traditional service, we hire 2 section leaders who bolster up the choir. The choir's not as big as they once were. And many in the choir have gotten older and can't sing in the way that they used to sing. And there's a lot of grieving about that. But at the same time, it's like, well, what are we gonna do about it? So we hired some section leaders and they're there every week. And they really help as the glue to keep things going and keep things together. Because we know that music is a critical part of that service.
By section leader. Some alto.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and we just have two, so we're using a bass leader and a soprano leader. And the soprano, and both of them also do solos from time to time, since they're hired, make them work.
You can do that at the University of Arkansas very easily.
Yeah.
That's what we do. We've got 5 interns that we pay, and they're younger and they're really good.
Yeah,
And guess what? They bring their boyfriends and girlfriends. to church.
I know, right? So it's great. It's great outreach. And then also Sunday school. And then we'll take a little bit of a break here. But the remaining of the 5 go much faster. The most time is in the front end. But Sunday school needs, you got to figure out Sunday school. And you may be in a church where you don't have any kids at the time. It's okay. But you got to think about what's your strategy going to be. Sunday school faith needs to grow up, or else it's too easy to deconstruct. This is why 2/3 of our young people are leaving the faith. They go off to college and they encounter that first liberal arts professor that they find that tries to unpack everything that they thought they knew about the Bible. And they have no real faith apart from that, that tethers them to Jesus. And so they're like, well, then they what's called deconstructing, right? So they deconstruct that faith. But if their faith was built on just a bunch of propositional truths, that's easy to deconstruct. But if their faith is built on a relationship with Jesus, that's almost impossible to kill. So what we did in our Sunday school is yes, we care about them getting the Bible stories and everything, but it's less about that and more about how do I develop a relationship with Jesus? We use the Orange curriculum. Orange does not pay me to say that. We love it. It's got a small group and a large group component, and it's very relational. Now I know some Presbyterians don't think it's deep enough. Let's just agree to disagree.
They don't teach this in seminary. In fact, Union Presbyterian Seminary has just now hired someone to teach evangelism. And I haven't looked to see what that curriculum looks like, but somebody figured out they need at least one professor to be present to say that that belongs in the curriculum.
Interesting.
So it is interesting.
Yeah.
Because they'll teach us how to teach all the stuff in the book, but they don't teach about getting a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
I had to learn that in other places that I've been church. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. All right. Hey, let's take 5. Everyone get a bio break. This is about the time you realize you had too much coffee. And we'll gather back and we'll finish this up.
Yeah. How are you doing, James?
Oh, how are you?
No.
I feel like we are. I feel like there were. And Yvonne. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Oh, really? I'm just thinking.
Sort of page on that. When I needed this one, every time I was yesterday.
One thing, 3 hours. Things like.
See, I started that.
Oh, thank you.
I brought up the ice cream.
Got a line.
I see $5. Brought up an inflatable, it's easy to fit to do.
That was more about. It actually means that.
But not every church.
Yeah.
Good terminology.
It's, yeah. It's a bad. So, that's when you really step out. And that's what they were trying to do. Everything. Yes. Do some little donkey thing. You feel different? Yeah.
So they're not right all the time. It was fine. It was, it actual, said she wrote it. It was my.
Yeah.
And I have a app that said someone's trying to go in the deck, whatever the deck is, kind of break any deck that on the front. And that's why it went off and I went up there and no, nothing. There's a lot of electronic glitches. It's a new truck, fairly new. And I think the more technology they put on it, the more susceptible it is to issues.
It happened like kind of like. In a lot of time.
Oh,
Taking it in, check. Jason, I have to tell you about when we were meeting on the day. Several sessions, he did. And said, I'm in the.
yeah, we didn't say it though. We're both elders of Presbytery. You a bunch of things both locally and then over the state. Don't settle out. So Jason is someone who, I guess, originally bring him to Presbytery first. We used them at our church. Well, at first session.
Yeah.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
No, it's just water and everything.
Yeah.
But I just wanted water. I felt water was just a glass of water. Oh, we're not gonna solve the nation. Yeah, that was
Exactly.
Oh, definitely.
Oh, that's great.
How is that? Even better.
Raising temperatures.
Great. Because I remember I did that session for the session, and I never heard of it again. So I'm wondering if.
Well, there's probably. Well,
I was asking how things are going. I hadn't heard anything since I met.
I think good. I think the only problem with this our HVAC system. Down. Those things And some of the parts to replace it come from China. And we've been doing everything in Fellowship Hall now for 6 months. And I think it's for, I think, because we had really had I thought a pretty nice, vibrant looking, we redid the sanctuary, we redid the narthex again. Lots of stuff. And we did lots of things to kind of make it more, and then all of a sudden, we got to shut it down and go into this whole. Now, the good news is, for us, is that before the pandemic, we knew we needed to get into vision. We needed to screening, we needed to get a built-in camera. We were there before, which was really an odd thing. So I mean, we were ready to go. And now we've got built-in camera. Even all, we're streaming everything. So we get this online. I was gonna ask you a question. You know, in the state of Arkansas, or second, we got to Stuttgart or whatever, Rogers. You know, is that really attractive? Wouldn't it be better if we were like Hill Church or something?
That's exactly the move that we need. So our, we believe in the first Presbyterian church.
Oh, yeah, it's kind of like First United. Like, exactly. Let's have another couple of words.
But everybody knew it as Tower Hill Church colloquially because of its so
Our church.
so we just said, let's do a doing business as. Yeah. And create a website. Now, nobody ever said, because if anything, it's a lie.
I think so. I mean, I even. They don't want to like food stuff. It's like lost church.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Okay. All right, but I wanted to ask someone new.
Yeah.
About that, because I've always felt like that.
And for the handful of people that feel like, oh, a Presbyterian church, I don't think it's worth it. Many for like, oh yeah.
Because it's mainline, you know, I want something.
All right, we're gonna get started back again here, so I encourage everyone to cruise on back in. Maybe.
But it's carved, it was carved in.
I came down to 10 Commandments, huh? Or this, the
There it was on the old church.
original one that broke.
The Presbyterian church. Right? It said carved in stone, the Presbyterian church.
All right, we're gonna keep on going.
I'm not in a name change. We talk about that. I don't think we do. That's some.
All right, everyone good? We ready? All right, let's do it. The third key is a culture of genuine invitation. I said evangelism is an invitation to relationship. We have to develop churches that have a culture of genuine invitation. How do we offer Jesus relationally through friendship? There's a wonderful book that was written by Craig Allen Cooper and Walker Hayes, country music star Walker Hayes, wrote Fancy Like, that one that you hear everywhere. I had Craig on my podcast, episodes 250 and 251 of the Reclaim Leader podcast. He came on and talked about this. It's a wonderful book about a friendship between, at the time, atheist Walker Hayes and Pastor Craig Cooper. And Walker ended up coming to faith. It was really through their friendship. They became really close. Their families became close. He wrote a song about Craig. Before Walker became a Christian, he wrote this song, just appreciating Pastor Craig. And the thing that got him, and this became the title of the book, here's a lyric from the song. It says, I met Craig at a church called Redeeming Grace. It's like he understood my I don't want to be here face. I didn't bow my head, not one single prayer. but he just shook my hand, said, "I'm glad you're here." I think this book is what evangelism should be. And how do you create a culture in your church of genuine invitation? And why do we need this? Because I know a lot of us, we think we already have this. Right? I think most churches think, well, we already do that. We're inviting. It's not as automatic as we think it is. It takes a lot of intentionality to really welcome the stranger, to really welcome people who aren't like us, to go out of our way and out of our comfort zones to invite them into church or into our lives. There's another good book that I reference called I Once Was Lost. This book's a little older, 2008. Don Everts and Doug Schaub, they were college on campuses, and they noticed what they learned from the postmodern students that they had. They said what postmodern skeptics taught us about their path to Jesus was that there are 5 thresholds everybody goes through. Threshold 1 is trusting a Christian. Threshold 2 is becoming curious about Jesus. Threshold 3 is becoming open to change. Threshold 4 is actively seeking after Jesus. And then the 5th threshold is the threshold of faith in Jesus. Then, of course, there are stages of faith after that. But the idea is what the church usually assumes is that people are at stage 4 at least, that they're already seeking after Jesus. And you're here to tell them what Jesus is all about. That's not necessarily true. You have to think maybe the thing that somebody needs is not to get invited to church on Sunday morning. Okay, let's, for example, with Rogers, you have an early learning center of non-church families. Some of those families certainly have a church home somewhere else. Some of them don't. Your first move isn't to go to them and say, we'd love for you to come to church. Because you don't know where they are. If they're at any of the steps other than seeking, they're not going to come. A better move would be, how do we get people to trust a Christian? You give them something with asking nothing for return. So let's say, hey, I just wanted you to know, Christmas is coming up, and we're going to set up a really great display. A professional photographer are going to come up and do family pictures for free. So we want you to come. We have these seating times. We just think it'd be great for your family to get a picture done, right? And then they show up, and maybe when they get there, they're playing some fun Christmas music. Maybe you make a little maze out of hay bales and let the kids run around a maze in your parking lot and figure it out, right? Little kids. And then it's for free. You say, hey, you ask for their email. We're going to email you the picture. Now you have their email address. You can start building a relationship. But it's not based on you inviting them to church. In fact, that might not even be for a few stages. Most churches just sort of think that people are right there. They're ready to just a step away from Jesus, when actually they may be several steps, especially in today's culture. In 2008, Starbucks was only 7 months from insolvency. Can you believe that? Starbucks. Store owners cited the economy and competition as the culprits. To this, Howard Schultz told them that the real problem was we've forgotten our mission. Their mission was the people, not efficiency for the better bottom line. But the bottom line will come, but you've forgotten you're about serving people. And I often think, is that what's happened to the church? Perhaps we've forgotten our mission. So building a culture of genuine invitation. The number one evangelism tool of all time is personal invitation, undefeated, will always be. But invitations must be sent or they're no good. Right? How you ask matters. I feel like for the church, whether it's personal invitation or a church-wide invitation, I feel like what happens oftentimes is sort of like what happens when I get a phone call. Hey, come down to Orlando. 2 days, 3 nights. Only $100. Oh, that sounds great. Oh, that actually sounds affordable. We'll come down. No, you don't have to do anything. We take care of everything for you. You just have to attend a short presentation. I feel like this is what we do to people coming to church all the time. Oh yeah, come, it's great, come as you are and everything, and then,
Stay in your car.
and then we sort of bait and switch them a little bit, or give them something that they weren't expecting. So genuine invitation is truly like, I want to invite you into our life, and I'm going to be honest up front. You may, especially churches where you feel like, you're inviting a young person and there aren't many young people in your church. Just like, look, we don't have a lot of young people in our church, but we just care about you. If there's any way that we could help you, we'd love to see you come. If you don't, maybe you want to invite someone else and we could do like a Bible study or something together if you want to learn more. But just be honest, just be open with them and be inviting. That goes a long way. Again, another great book, Jeff Henderson's 4 Growth Strategy for Work and Even Better Strategy for Life, where he really talks about evangelism as community partnership. And we said, the hashtag campaign we talked about on Saturday here at Rogers, but it's another great resource. And I think he has a curriculum now, a video curriculum that you could do. And maybe that's something that your session wants to think about. He was a high up in Chick-fil-A who then became one of the pastors for North Point Community Churches, planted Gwinnett Church in Gwinnett County, Georgia, and has had incredible success there. So again, knowing what you're for, not what you're against, is his whole thing. Does your community know what you're for? Or do you only speak up when you want to cancel somebody or something? Right? Okay. And then 4, active gospel contextualization. That's cheeseburgers to vegans, right? Just making sure that how we're framing, how we're saying the gospel makes sense to the people that we're saying it to. We're saying it in their language. Like if I were trying to teach sin to a congregation in a sermon, I would speak about it differently than my 10-year-old who asked me about sin. I'm not dumbing it down. I'm using his language in a way that he understands. If my 8th grader came and asked me about it, I might do it all in emojis. I'm just kidding. I would say it in Snapchat. I don't know. But I've got to speak it in the language of the people that I'm trying to reach. So let's say that I'm trying to say something to a group of people who've been jaded by church, jaded about church. They've been burned by church. And so I'm talking about something, and I'll just acknowledge, I'll say, I'm sorry if you've been burned by church. You've probably been to churches that have let you down. And guess what? We're not perfect either. But don't hold it against Jesus. Let me tell you what it's really like. Right? It's disarming. It's inviting. It's how you take the gospel and land it in life. How do we proclaim the gospel in their own language? You all, if you've heard me talk before, I'm big on this. Unapplied truth is like unapplied paint. It doesn't do anybody any good. The value is in the application, and they have to understand it in order to apply it. Meeting people where they are is about landing the good news of Jesus in their everyday lives. In other words, we must translate the never-changing truth of Jesus into the ever-changing language of culture. Translate the never-changing truth of Jesus into the ever-changing language of culture. And again, my foundational text for that is Acts 2. We hear them declaring the wonders of God in our own tongues. Amazed and perplexed, they asked one another, what does this mean? Again, the first gift of the Holy Spirit to the church is the gift of divine translation in order to speak the wonders of God into the language of the people. Sometimes that's ethnic language, and sometimes that's generational language. Cultural language is the same, no matter what that is, what culture you're trying to reach. We must become master translators. I always use this example. Again, I keep saying this, but I talk about this a lot when I'm doing consultations, so it's repetitive for those who I just talked to 2 days ago. But If I were to ask my World War II Navy cook grandfather, so I'd never been inside a sanctuary, what's it look like? What might he describe to me? What's a proper sanctuary? Go ahead. Any
Pews.
pews?
Big communion table, a cross hanging down from the ceiling.
That's good. What else? What else might he say?
Stained glass.
Stained glass. Yeah.
Pulpit.
Pulpit up. Yeah.
Choir.
Pipe organ.
Pipe organ. Yeah. So he described something like really, symmetrical woodworking,
Like,
right? American flag and the Christian flag, which I don't know who decided on the Christian flag. That's a piece of history that I don't know.
thought it was Christ.
How the disciples ever worship without a Christian flag in the room? I don't know how. Anyway, but then their children, the children of the 60s, they're the ones that created the contemporary worship movement that was born out of the Jesus music of the 60s. And it was all about, we don't want our parents' church. That doesn't speak to us anymore. I know there are a lot of baby boomers still in churches, but largely they're not in churches, or at least not in traditional churches. And it's because, well, we want something different. We like the technology. We want comfortable seating. We want more of engaging in the music that we like, that resonates with us. Their kids, my generation, we're like, yeah, we like technology and everything, but we want authenticity. We value authenticity over everything. So I want to make sure it's not a show. I want it to feel like we're being honest with one another, with the Lord. We're having a moment here. The millennials are like, we don't even need a sanctuary. Let's just do perpetual youth group. The church doesn't connect with us. Let's go sit in the living room and eat pizza and talk about Jesus, and that's our church. Yeah, my kids' generation were digital natives. They knew how to operate an iPad before you did. 2 years old, they somehow know how to swipe and like do it. Like, who taught you that? How do you know that? And who knows what is going to reach them? The point is, a one-size-fits-all approach isn't going to be effective when it comes to church. And I'll say this too, even churches like some of the big megachurch non-denoms, I think where they struggle is they don't have a lot of generations in the same church. It's kind of a squished age range, which has its advantages and its disadvantages. They're not getting from the previous generations the wisdom and knowledge and counsel and life experience and all that I think is critical in the life of a church. And I think they miss it. I think a lot of them do. Active gospel contagion. All I'm really talking about is like you're learning about somebody before you talk to them about Jesus. You're learning, what are they like? How do they talk? How do they understand things? So how do I take the gospel and say it in their language? That's what you're doing. You got to do it. And the reason why you have to do it is because your evangelism efforts won't go very far because they won't make sense to them. It's like saying narthex to me back then. I didn't know what you were talking about. All right. And then the last one, personal discipleship engagement. How do we go beyond programs and create personal discipleship pathways? This is a drawing from Tony Morgan and the Unstuck group. They're also a church consulting group, but I love this picture. The difference between programs and a pathway in the life of a church. The problem is most of our churches think in terms of programs. Oh, we've got this program, we got this program, and this program. What happens is you get a logjam of programs that are all competing for the same money, the same human resources, same volunteers, and the same people that you're trying to attract to your church. And it's like buckshot. So all of your energy is going into this thing where you got tons of programs, but are delivering what you want? And that is, are you helping people take a next step of faith for your programs? Or are you just having programs to have programs? What's more effective is to think in terms of a pathway. How am I creating a pathway for people to take a step of faith? So let's go back to our early learning center example. We're going to do a picture booth at Christmas, and we want to invite people there. Okay. When we have that, we're not just having it to have a one-off program. We want to ask them to take a step. So maybe it's, you know what we really want to promote? We've got this really fun Christmas carols and cookies that we're going to do. And our young families would love that. And so let's make sure we invite them at the Christmas picture to the other event. You're creating a pathway. What are they doing? They're taking a step of trust with you to come to another thing. And maybe 2 or 3 down the road is, hey, you know what we're going to do this Sunday for Sunday school? It's going to be really fun. It's going to be like VBS. We're going to do it for 4 Sundays in a row. There's going to be lots of crafts and lots of fun, lots of singing, lots of activities. And we're just doing it for the next month. And we'd love if you'd come and be a part. We think your kids are going to love it. You're creating a pathway that's taking them on a journey toward greater engagement in the life of the church. That's different from a program. You can take multiple programs and create a pathway. But having programs just to have programs usually gets in the way of what you're trying to do. And it's unclear the step that you're asking people to take. When developing pathways, team members should put themselves in the situation of the person with whom a relationship is being built. Ask questions like, if I were this person, what actions would I find encouraging and what would I perceive to be annoying? My colleague, who's my parish associate at the church, Teresa, who has been at the church a long time, and she was the associate pastor for a long time. And we're very close. We've gone the last 10 years, we've journeyed together in every change that we made, right? She is funny because she talks about churches that follow you home. She said her daughter went to a church once, and when she got returned home, there were already cookies on her doorstep from the church before she got home. And she said it creeped her out. She did not like that at all. Some of us would be like, oh, that's so, wow, that's impressive. Before I even got home, they deliver something, that's great. And she's like, I'm never going back to the church. That was scary. Like, that's just wait, right? You just have to make sure you get the people that you're trying to reach again and think like them. It used to be, I mean, right? It used to be, you used to have stuff on hand in case somebody came over. Oh, you know, we got that frozen meatloaf in there in case the Johnsons come home. But nowadays, someone comes to your house and invited you. What are they doing here? That's just different. So again, your first event in a pathway should be something like, we start at the top there, like that newcomers event. Something that's a low risk ask. And how you discover who they are, right? You got to discover who they are and ask something that's low risk for them. You're not asking them, hey, will you come write a statement of faith? We'll have donuts, right? That's way too risky. Right? Something that's low risk. And then you can invite them, it could be a couple of things that are low risk. And then you get them into a group where they're interacting. But make sure if you invite them into a group, like, hey, we're going to do this study on parenting post-pandemic. Make sure you clearly define it's like 4 weeks. It's not a life sentence. We're having 4 sessions. It's going to end. Make sure it makes sense to them. And then once they go through that, and they've engaged in a couple of things, then it's, hey, will you help lead? We're going to do this again in a couple of months. We'd love it if would you be willing to just help us run it? And you could help us tweak it. There's something that we could have done better. And what are you doing? You're creating a pathway of engagement for them. And now they're involved in the life of your church, right? There are a lot of different ways that you can do that. And it's not just a pathway. It's about personal attention. Disciples are handcrafted, not mass produced. I think one thing that we all need to work on, and this is probably the biggest challenge, is how do we give people enough personal attention? So it's not just come to this step in the pathway, but it's how can I help you discern your next step? And I think you just need a couple of people in the life of the church willing to do that. People who are particularly gifted at it. Because what people really want is kind of a customized experience based on what they feel they need. So if you have a couple of people in the church that you call, your connect ministry or whatever that looks like for you, or your next steps ministry, you say, oh yeah, call Carol in next steps and she'll talk with you. And, we can talk with them about, what's going on? And you're like, what do you think you need? Are there some areas that you'd like to learn about? Well, I'll tell you what, these, maybe you want to try this. That personal attention is everything, because then it's showing that they really matter to you. They're not some sort of means to an end. They feel served, not used, by saying, no, we love you. It's not just we just love your demographic. We love you. And how can we help you grow in your life of faith? It's funny, it doesn't take much to do that for a lot of people. If you had a couple of people who were willing to give 3 hours a week to that, you could serve a lot of people by just helping to connect them. You could even do it on a Sunday morning, be like, hey, outside in the foyer, we've got a couple of volunteers back there. If you don't know how you want to connect with the church, you don't know what's next, they're there to talk with you. So why don't you join them, right? Some personal attention. Yeah.
So are you putting this onto the members, or sometimes pastors feel like that is their territory and they don't want to give it up?
Yeah, I would not have a pastor do it because I think a pastor is too threatening. Some people would like that, but a lot of people be like, I'm not talking to a pastor. You know what I mean? So I would utilize volunteers if you can. And keep the pastors updated. Oh yeah, I talked with this person and they were like, okay, great. But I think it's better if the pastor doesn't do all that stuff.
How do you pull it away from the pastors graciously and not offend them because they think that is their role?
Yeah. Well, I think it's having a conversation about the vision. And the important thing is, you, as a pastor, you don't want to be the lid on your own vision. In other words, you don't want to be the limiting factor. The best thing for the life of the church is to equip others to do the things that I'm doing, because I want this to outlive my tenure at the church, and I want it to outdo my capacity. I can only handle so many people, but the only way that we exponentially help people is we get more people to do what I'm doing. So, I mean, they can still be a part of it for sure, but I would encourage them to look at it like, how do we build this team so we could serve more people?
Sometimes talking to the pastor is too commitment made.
Yeah.
Where I'm talking to somebody else. It's like when you are in a class like this and you're like, what did he say? You don't want to go, Jason, I didn't hear like you said.
Right.
How many times that happened to you?
Yeah.
And that's an approach to make to the ministers too, because sometimes people don't like to be talking to someone where there's a commitment.
Yeah.
So,
Little encouragement here. They've gone through some of these reefs that have died years later and come back and found new growth. I think this is true in the church. I think the church can adapt the conditions around it like these reefs have. And we can have new life and new growth. But we're our own limiting factor. Are we going to go for it? Or are we just going to ride it out until we're off this earth because we just get what we want? Or are we truly going to take seriously this generation that's hungry for the gospel, hungry for connection? Are we going to serve them? How are we going to answer Jesus when he asks us, did you serve the least of these? What answer are we going to give? Man, I don't want to be stumped on that question. If you ever need to reach out to me, you certainly can. Email jason@reclaimleader.com, or you can check out our church website, towerhillchurch.org. It's been a blessing to get to talk with you today. And I guess we use any leftover time for questions if anyone has them.
I've got one.
Sure, I'll stop sharing my screen so it's not in everyone's way.
Go back, if you would, to your first step, because feels a little bit like to me that if you don't really get on the scale, that this is a little bit of a house of cards in a way. Tell me how you help people really take a hard look at what's going on so that you can start moving. Help me.
Sure. So in the beginning of a consultation process, for example, I will just input data. I will ask people about what are the perceived strengths and weaknesses of the church. And I will also start to get who are they reaching and not reaching. And what that tells me, it tells me a lot of things, but it tells me, I'm looking at financial reports and I'm looking at membership report. I'm looking at annual reports. I'm trying to compile who is the church, who do the church people think they are, and who are they really? Who are they trying to reach? So a lot of church leaders are afraid of this step because it's very uncomfortable. And I think some pastors, if we're being honest pastors, is we feel threatened that it's got some sort of an indictment on our performance if it's not going well. And I don't know what to say other than I think we'd all rather have the truth than I would think, even if the truth hurts. I want to know how bad it is so I could do something about it. I mean, you're not going to be able to do something about the things you don't address. But stepping on the scale is literally, let's collect the numbers. Let's figure it out, because there's always that version of the church we have in our heads that may not even be true anymore. It's a version of the church we had from years ago. So I think it's just looking at how many kids do we have in Sunday school? What is the status of these certain ministries in the life of our church? What is our real fiscal situation? I know we've made a lot of excuses about XYZ. How is it really? Are we as healthy as we thought we were? Maybe not, but just like, you can't get the diagnosis unless you show up to the office. I mean, you gotta figure out how to start collecting that data, but that's how you do it in the beginning, on the front end. You collect as much data as you can about yourselves. You also think about, well, who are we hoping to reach and why aren't we reaching them? And it's in those questions, it can get people have strong opinions. That's okay. Just know that the whole goal of this thing is we want to flourish. We want to be a healthy, faithful version of ourselves that's doing the kingdom work we were called to do. It's the toughest part, but then once you get through that, it becomes the most exciting part, because now you've addressed what it is. You've been able to say, this is what's going on. And now when we look to do this other initiative, it starts getting exciting because we're doing something about it. And that creates great congregational energy when you get to that step. It really does. Because you start doing things and you don't just do them just to do them. You do them because you know exactly why you're doing them. And you might do some things that don't work. And you just look at each other like, well, that didn't work. What can we do better? That happens to our church all the time. I'm just going to say, we try stuff all the time, it doesn't work. Doesn't work the way we want. Okay, well, that didn't work. We just sort of laugh. But so what else are we going to try?
You fail though.
Yeah. I mean, we're so afraid to fail that we don't do anything, which is way worse. So let's say you tried the Christmas photo booth and 0 families show up. All right, that didn't work. What else are we going to do? Someone's got to pay that photographer. I don't know. But okay, so then we figure out what's next. We can even follow up. Ask the ELC to ask them. Oh yeah, we're just curious for those who might have missed it. Was the time bad? You could ask questions, follow-up questions like that. You know what I'm saying? Other questions? All right, hearing none, I will turn it back over to Carol Clark, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Presbytery, for having me. And as always, a blessing to be with you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everybody. First, Roger, we appreciate so much you making this space available, and Jane for really hanging in there with the technology. Thank you for being here. Have safe trips home.
Thank you.
Thank you.